Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to have a look at the Foreign Sale Congress. My name is Daniel Gomali and welcome back to my YouTube channel, Hometown Chess Hero. And yeah, interesting situation developing that Lorenzo Fava had a very... sorry, I thought they had a quick draw, but they didn't. For some reason they gave that as a quick draw, but the game seems to be developing, and it was given as a quick draw, but now the game is continuing. It's possible that they may have agreed a draw and then they were told that there's new rules involved. I don't know the situation, but it seems like a very strange developing situation. But Fava is black. If he wins, he will be outright tournament winner. Andrew Burdett needs to win to come equal first in the tournament. Let's just have a look at the opening. So Fava's had a very good tournament, and he's somebody I played last year in the Cambridge Open, which is in February, and I drew. And actually, I remember that game. He played some kind of Bishop B5 check Sicilian. I was doing well in the middle game, but then I slightly misplayed it, and I was worse. And actually, I started to realise I was much worse, so I offered a draw. And it was quite impressive that he confidently turned it down and played on. Because a lot of players in that situation, they're rated 2000, second game of the day, they're playing the GM, they're probably going to agree a quick draw, right? You know, so I was obviously using a little bit of bluff. In a way, you know, I'm using my kind of title. It often happens that people get scared into agreeing draws with GMs. He was having none of it, and then he continued to play well. Actually got a winning position, but then he messed it up, and I managed to draw. So interesting, yeah. And I realised then, obviously, he's a very confident player because why would you play on against GM unless you're confident? I think that's something you need to have success in any kind of activity, particularly chess, which is a very, you know, confidence-based activity. And, you know, it's kind of like a middle line that you're on, and you kind of got to use kidology to kind of like put yourself above that line, if that makes any sense. Rather than below. It's very easy to start thinking you're slightly below that line, and there's kind of like a truth in how strong you are. And you've got to use kidology to believe that you're slightly better than that, rather than slightly below. And the ones who are more successful are probably more likely to believe that they're slightly above that line rather than slightly below. But, yeah, it's a fine line. Anyway, I drew with him, and, yeah, he had a good tournament. And he's having a good tournament again. He drew with Keith with black. And he managed to beat Edward Jackson with white. Very nice game. So Keith is in contention. If he wins, he can tie for first if Fava doesn't win. There's quite a few people who are in that situation. Also, Peter Wells is in that situation, that if he wins, he could potentially be tying for first place. It could be a big pile-up on 4 out of 5. Alternatively, it could be only maybe 2 players or even 1 player on 4 out of 5. If all those games are drawn, unlikely, I would say. There's also a very interesting situation. Super Tit Banerjee is tied for first. He's black against Michael Bulford, who's quite a solid player. And if Super Tit manages to win, he could potentially be tied for first, which would be an incredible result given he's only 10 years of age. So, amazing result so far for Super Tit. He missed the first round, often the case with juniors. He missed the first round because of school commitments. So, it's even more impressive, actually, that he's in a contention potentially to win the tournament. He had an interesting endgame in round 4. The games in round 4. For example, Fava won a nice endgame against Jackson. This game I felt was a little bit slightly weird, just the amount of time that they were spending in the opening over very simple decisions. Funny enough, the same line More or less the same line I had against Keith in a tournament in Guernsey. It might have even been the same line. I think in that game we went d5. I can't remember if I took with the bishop or the queen on d2 as I'm getting old. I think I did take with the bishop actually. But we drew very quickly there. Partly because I think we both wanted to come equal first in the tournament, and potentially we had, after that game, we had the stronger pairings out of the way. But I think I still had Harry Grieve to play. I ended up drawing with Harry Grieve, I believe. And we all came equal first on 6-9. But we got kind of a little bit of abuse for that at the prize game, which I thought was unwarranted. Some guy was a bit drunk, maybe, or maybe not. Said something like we were English cowards or something like that. And I just thought it's not warranted. Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't have been agreeing early draws, but you do get pre-arrangements in GM games, unfortunately. I played Chernayev the other day, and potentially in the past that might have been a pre-arranged game. It wasn't a pre-arranged game for NCL. And we actually played a proper game, but I just I messed it up very slightly. And then when it was an equal position, he offered me a draw, and I probably should have. Obviously, I didn't know it was equal. I was just using my own judgment. I felt slightly uncomfortable because he had a very strong knight on d5. Felt slightly awkward, so I accepted his draw offer. But in this game, Peter was actually slightly better because I think this whole opening is slightly depressing for Black when you go for this c5 line. It's not the most common line actually, because you're losing a bishop pair and you've lost some dark square control. So overall, strategically slightly better for White, but not enough to make it an easy win. In fact, it's actually hard to win White's position, I would say. There was an interesting moment here that White had an opportunity to go knight c7, which I imagine Peter spotted. He probably saw that move, but he dismissed it. He would have seen that after rook takes, bishop takes, queen takes, queen d5, White is better. Well, actually probably winning, right? Because what do you play? Your bishop's getting hit and the knight. So your only way to defend both pieces is to go here, I guess. But then rook d1, this is more likely than not to be very good for White. Maybe there's other moves as well that I'm missing. But the tricky line is g5. But after g5, apparently you go queen d5 and you're a lot better. But after rook e7, yeah, because the better move is rook c8. But that's a hard move to spot in the game, because it looks like you might be walking to a knight d6 pin, like if you take. If you take, there's rook takes, knight d6, rook f4, for example. Maybe lines like that come into the equation. I don't know. Anyway, that game was agreed a draw, and now we're on the final round. And Father is playing Black against Burnett. Do we think Father will win the game? Quite possibly. But Burnett is also very solid. I drew with Burnett about a couple of years ago in the tournament in Blackpool. That was a tough game, actually. I was in trouble and I was losing in that game. I was Black in the Sunday morning game, and I probably needed 1.5 out of 2 to win the tournament outright. In the end, I got 1 out of 2 and a massive pile up on 4 out of 5, which is quite likely to happen here as well. If Father doesn't win with Black, we could get several players tying for first. On the other hand, like I said before, we could also get a big. So this game, Black's just gone 95. That's a reasonable move. What can White play here? Oh, okay, we've already exchanged the dark square bishop. So that should be some kind of advantage for White, because it makes it, you know, the bishop on g7 in the Benoni is a very powerful piece. On the other hand, Black is fairly solid. He's gone g5, which in the long term is a very weakening move. But on the other hand, Black seems to have a fairly solid position. What are the candidate moves here? I mean, a move like a5 comes in the equation, just clamping down on his queen side. Potentially looking at this b6 square as a potential weakness. Knight g4 is also a move. He's trying to undermine this knight. Bishop g4, slightly, maybe not optimal because you're weakening the defence of this square. So that might not be the best. Yeah, Keith does well to win so many tournaments because he's in his 60s and he's travelling around a lot, going all around the country, winning chess tournaments. Even in his 60s, had a very long, successful career. And yeah, continues to be very successful. Probably the most successful tournament player in Britain in terms of winning number of tournaments that he wins. I mean, in terms of the quality of the tournaments, you look at someone like Michael Adams, who's winning tournaments like Cambridge and British. You know, those are the signature events that you want to win. However, even these smaller events are not easy to win. Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to make a real impact, you'd like to win something like Cambridge or the British. However, it's not easy to even get into Cambridge. I didn't get conditions for Cambridge, unfortunately. They only had a limited number of places. Obviously, you know, the hotel there is quite expensive to pay for the tournament controllers. Wasn't able to get in this year. Was able to get in last year. But yeah, if you won something like that, if you were someone like a Fernandez or a Gartzi, you win a tournament like that, you know, you're kind of making your mark. Especially Adams is there, but Adams would probably be the clear favourite. I mean, someone like Schreyer Royal's probably played in that tournament as well, so that'd be interesting. Yeah, I was putting up this poll, and I these very talented juniors, and I said, you know, who is the most talented junior? You know, who's potentially going to have the highest FIDE rating? And one of the so I did these matchups, and one of the matchups I did was Supertit against his Scottish teammate or compatriot, I should say, Freddie Gordon. And Freddie Gordon won, actually, interesting enough. Supertit, I think, is very promising. I think he might actually be more promising even than Freddie. I tend to overrate potential in a way. So if somebody is younger, I would probably overrate that in a sense that I would say, you know, they will improve more. Obviously, Freddie's ahead at the moment anyway in terms of FIDE, but I would say that maybe at the same age, Supertit will be ahead. But it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes you can overrate potential and players don't improve as much as you think because they've already done a huge amount of work when they're younger and they're not necessarily trading on as much as you think. So you look at the talent level, you think the ability level. I think the Supertit is a bit of a freak. You know, he beat me in a Blitz tournament. And I can't remember losing to many 9 or 10-year-olds since I've been like GM level. So very interesting player for the future. Another matchup I've done is Bod Hanna versus Shreyas Royal. Yeah, I was interested actually on Twitter. It's interesting that they put in Bod Hanna ahead. Sorry, they're putting Shreyas ahead. Most people are voting for Shreyas to have a higher. So the question is, who will have the highest FIDE classical rating by the end of their career? And I would actually go for Bod Hanna, even though I think Shreyas is also very promising. I'd go for Bod Hanna because I think C is actually potentially superstar material. I'm not sure he is. I'm not sure he's like 2700 plus material worse. I think C is. I think C could be the next Judith Polgar. However, you could equally argue that generally with boys and girls, it's the boy who ends up with the highest rating overall. That might sound sexist, but there are not many female players, there are very few female players in history who have got to 2600, I mean, there's only one who's got 2700 plus as far as I'm aware, which is Judith Polgar. And there's very few who've got the 2600 plus. I think Humpy would be one. I think Chinese Yaifan, Hoi Yaifan would also be another one. And that's about it. I don't think there's many others actually, to be honest with you, who've got over 2600. Very few. So yeah, generally you'd go with the male, and I think there's actually a specific reason for that. Firstly, there's more males that play chess, which is the biggest reason. You could point to genetics. You could say that men are slightly, maybe they're more suited. Some people have made studies like this and said, you know, men's brains are more suited to play chess. However, I think, yeah, the first reason is possibly the most compelling reason, is just simply the pure numbers don't favour the females. And the other reason, I think, generally a lot of women tend, I know it sounds sexist to say this, but a lot of women end up giving up chess. And again, maybe the male kind of obsessional personality is more suited to that kind of pursuit in terms of getting to that very high level. Generally speaking, with you know, younger women players, they tend to like get to the teenage years and then they're like, actually, I want to pursue something else. You know, I met a lot of female players over the course of my career, like, and a lot of them, they just quit when they got into like their mid-20s or something like that. You know, Sabrina Siobhan's, for example, is a good example of that. She more or less stopped playing when she got older. You know, pretty decent junior. Sarah Longston's playing in the tournament, actually. She's still playing. Good to see that she's still playing. But her good friend Katie Martin more or less quit chess. I mean, she doesn't really play much anymore. But obviously, Bod Hannay wouldn't really compare her directly to them, because I think she is actually, you know, in a different category. I think she's, you know, one of the most promising younger players that we've seen in this country, actually. And it was interesting. I watched the Sky News interview with her, and she said, and they asked her, "What are your ambitions?" And she said to become world champion. She didn't say, "I want to become women's world champion." She just become world champion, full stop. They said, "When do you want to become world champion?" And she said, "In my teenage years." So that's very interesting. So I think a lot of these juniors are very, very promising and are also very ambitious. So it'll be interesting to see over the next few years how much, you know, when we get like a 14 or 15-year-old directly competing with the older generation on equal terms. That'd be very interesting. So A5, that was one of the moves I suggested, with the idea of knight A4, knight B6. Positionally good decision. Black needs to find a way to create counterplay, I believe, on the king's side. Natural move would be knight G7, supporting the F5 break. That looks like the most natural move. The good point from Black's point of view is that F4 break by White is not really on the cards for the time being, because that will run into G takes F4. So if I want to go knight G7, you go knight A4, I could potentially go F5. Now if you go knight B6, I'm with the rook. You take on F5, I take. I take with the bishop. I seem to have quite a decent attacking position as Black. Although there is the move knight C4. Another line is, in this position, you could also take on C8 and then take. Bishop G4, yeah, actually that is a problem. Yeah, so that actually is a line that wins for White. So maybe that's the idea. So you could go knight G7, but that line's quite transparent. Obviously it doesn't mean that Black will see it. Of course, after rook B8, knight C8, rook takes C8, you're probably realising that, yeah, once they take on F5, you're probably realising that this line doesn't work, so therefore you look for another move, and you could probably still maybe survive to a certain degree, even with that pawn on F5, but you have lost a pawn. So, yeah, very interesting decision. A5, I think that's a good move. Maybe bishop D7 actually is a move, and just try to exchange the knight directly, and then play knight G7 and just wait. And I think Black should just wait here and see what White does. Maybe White will try and build up with B4, or will try and play for F4. But it seems to me like Black has a reasonable position out the opening. What's happening to Peter Wells' game? He's playing Gary Senior. That's somebody I played in Cambridge last year. Apparently some kind of solicitor, Gary Senior, although he may well be retired. Seems to be playing more chess these days. Gary Senior, yeah, he's a decent player actually. He doesn't play that much, but he seems to play quite well when he plays. H6 was played by PK. Yeah, interesting move. Yeah, I quite like PK's position actually out the opening. It seems quite promising for Black in terms of trying to play for win. Objectively, might not be better for Black, but it's very clear what your plan is. Eventually, you're probably going to play F4, maybe even on the next move, and then go G5, and then try and attack on the king side. Or you could even play G5 immediately. There's another option. So white in this kind of position, this is often why I find actually, yeah, this is a variation I played against Chinaev. And, but I generally don't have a very good record with bishop b5. I don't think it suits me that much to exchange the bishops. Some people love playing with the knights against the bishops, but yeah, this kind of position very promising for white. I mean, what is the knight doing on c2? I don't understand. If you go here, maybe I could even take on e4 actually, and then either consider bishop f5 or even d5 actually, and then start pushing e4. Yeah, so I don't really like white's position very much. It looks slightly awkward to come up with a decent plan, and this plan for black very obvious, like f4. I mean, what's the engine say? Yeah, I thought b4 might be a move, but just in general, you're just going to go g5 and try and undermine white on the king side. And Gary would need to find some very clever moves to keep the game going. Frankie Badasconi is actually clearly better against Paul Townsend. Knight e5. I wonder if this is still preparation. Knight e5, interesting move. I've seen a similar idea in these kind of lines. Rather than play, for example, more passive move b3 or queen c2, he's just gone knight e5. So the problem is you can't go here because of knight c6. So bishop b7 and then directly go for e4. Yeah, so the main line might be something like this, but the problem with these variations is it's not easy to get in c5. And white has a move or two now. They may be able to do something before you get c5 in. I mean, queen f3 actually springs to mind as a potential move. But then maybe f5. Queen f3, you could go f5. So Frankie is... yeah, there's two Badasconi brothers who play chess. One is called Stan, who's very promising. And a very good blitz player. He's like 2800 on Lee Chess. And there's also Frankie, and I believe they're both from London. The mother's called Ali. You see, he works as some kind of psychiatrist, I believe. Very intelligent woman. Yeah. He's playing a lot of chess, Frankie. He's well prepared. He's a fairly solid player, I would say. He drew in the morning with Sarakauskis. That was a good result. I think Sarakauskis could have pushed a bit more in this tournament. He seems to be maybe too happy to take quick draws. I think if he maybe pushed the boat out a little bit more, taking a few more risks, he might be clear leader right now. Or at least joint leader. But as it is, he's trailing, needs to win. How's he doing? Yeah, he's got a decent pairing against Stuart White. He's a decent player from Scotland. I don't think he's from another guy, maybe not from Scotland originally, right? So could you take here? But actually, you can't break down d5, can you? So actually, it seems like... Yeah, actually, natural move here would just be to avoid the problems on the b file and just go here. And actually, White's position is probably reasonable. Not better, but... Maybe not better, but... my instincts would say that White is at least equal here. Yeah. Okay. And Badgery is clearly worse. So he's going to have his work cut out to beat Bolford. I believe... Is Bolford tied for the lead? I think Bolford's tied... No, he's tied second. So Bolford needs to win as well. Bolford needs to win and then hope that, as we said before, that... So I think these are the pair. I don't think Jackson or Henderson can tie for first. I think it's just these top six boards. Father is playing black against Burnett. Actually, it's getting short of time now for him. So Burnett could potentially, with a win, tie for first. Burnett knows that if he wins, he ties for first. Whereas the other guys, they're not certain. Obviously, they're depending on Burnett. So yeah, Burnett knows, like, this is certain in his mind that if he wins, he ties for first. So it would be a strange decision for him to offer a quick draw, to be honest. Although a lot of people lose their nerve. I mean, I'm guilty of this as much as anyone. You know, it's very easy to lose your nerve in critical situations. For example, the British, go back a few years. You know, there have been many British years where I've agreed draws and I've like regretted it later. You know, when you end up, you don't win the tournament or you don't get a good get good placing. And you're like, why did I agree those quick draws earlier in the event? You know, not just the British, but other tournaments as well. You know, that's obviously an important one from the British perspective. But there's been other tournaments in the past where potentially I could have come equal first. And or maybe outright first, and then yeah, I was agreeing quick draws, like, and effectively taking myself out of the equation. Well, sometimes it can be a good strategy to agree quick draws. You know, for example, Northumbria Masters last year, you know, there were one or two situations where I did agree quicker draws, and it paid off for me, and I ended up coming equal first in the tournament. To a certain extent, but you could equally argue maybe if I'd taken a bit more risk there, I could have ended up winning the tournament outright. So anyway, this is the situation. Any more moves in the Keith game? Black has, oh wow, Black has directly played f5, which is interesting. Yeah, because Rook is not on c8. So if you take, of course I should have considered this move. Yeah, I mean, Black's position looks practically reasonable. You know, so clearly a plan is to bring the knight either to g7 or f6, probably to g7, because you don't really, well, you could end up getting, the rook could get into trouble if you go knight f6, but mind you, rook can always go to f4 if you hit the rook. So maybe knight f6 or knight g7 or even knight c7 and then bring the rook to f8 and then attack f2. So Keith got his work cut out against Petra Dendersky from Poland. Gary Senior didn't see any more moves in that game. He did go b4. He found the best move. However, Peter is better. One thing I'll say about Peter, he does often get into time trouble almost every game, and particularly with his time control, where you don't get any extra moves after move 40. That's a really practically not great situation to find yourself in, where you're constantly in time trouble. You know, so I feel like when I play Peter, like in one of these kind of events, I want to somehow keep the game going. You know, not be worse. I don't necessarily need to be better, but if I'm not worse and the game becomes complicated and he's never going to get any more time, and I'm up on the clock, you know, I would say that, you know, I've got good chances to win the game. But obviously he's a very good player, don't get me wrong, but he has had a reputation. He's probably kind of limited his career to a certain extent. The fact that he's been a time trouble addict. And the reason he is a time trouble addict, he told me, I asked him before, I said, you know, I remember it was at like a dinner, I think, maybe the Isle of Man or something, one of these tournaments years ago. And I said, you know, why are you always getting into time trouble? And he said, because I'm chronically insecure. And that was the reason. That's why he spent a lot of time. Generally, people who are time trouble addicts are people who are unsure of themselves, who are not that confident. They're generally the guys who are getting into, you know, guys and girls who are getting into time trouble a lot because they're really unsure, you know, of themselves. It's not really like they're even unsure what move to play. They're just unsure of themselves, and they're just insecure, and they just can't decide on a decision because they just lack that super confidence, you know. So Peter's a very talented player. I think, you know, he could have achieved much more in chess. But that's probably limited his career to a certain extent. The fact that he's been a massive time. But he's obviously a very strong player. You know, he's winning a lot of these sort of tournaments. But Frankie, yeah, he seems to have a very promising position at the opening against Paul Townsend, who also, I believe, is a retired solicitor. So quite a lot of retired solicitors in this event. And yeah, I quite like White's position he's taken here. The problem is if you take here, there might be a bishop a6, but then you do have a4, but then queen b6 will happen. So probably you don't take there, and probably you play a move like rook e1. Then black will go b4. Yeah, so actually you could get a variation like this. Maybe it's not that great for White, actually. Yeah. Actually, bishop g5 is not a good move. a5 is better. So actually the best move is queen g4, intending bishop h6. Now if you go king h8, and now I take, and then I go a4, and if you go queen b6, bishop d5. Wow, very hard to see all this. Well, not that hard, but but you know, very easy to miss, I would imagine. Yeah, so actually very much in the balance this whole tournament. Very open tournament still. A lot will depend on this Lorenzo Fava result. Okay, this can't be the right position, right? So actually I'm thinking that... No, actually it is. It does look like a stupid sequence of moves. However, interesting. He's played knight b6, nice superb. Yeah, so wow, it's kind of a crazy sequence of moves actually. c5 and then yeah, I wouldn't play like this as White. Actually, b6 was the best move. I'd be very scared to do all this as White with your king on e1. Funny enough, I was analysing a variation like this yesterday, but different opening. But yeah, it just looks very ropey actually for White. What he's doing. Knight a6 is quite decent, but b6 just the most natural move, right? You want to get a bishop to a6 as soon as possible. I just feel very, very uncomfortable here as Bernat. I wouldn't be surprised if Fava won this game actually. He's played a really excellent tournament so far, so he could be a promising super talent for the future. Anyway, that's enough for me today. Thanks for watching the video. Please like and subscribe. And yeah, thanks for watching.